Welcome back to the Beer Junkies. Today we are brewing an American Amber Ale. This style is kind of tough because there are so many different ways you can interpret it. The beer that I'm going to brew today is going to have a very nice balance between a deep malt character with notes of caramel and biscuit, and it's going to be paired with a very prominent hop character with lots of citrus flavors and aromas from the New World hops. Like I said, they're both going to balance each other out. Neither one is going to outshine the other one too much. The bitterness is going to be noticeable somewhere in the 30 IBU range, but it is not going to be too bitter and encroach on that IPA territory. We're going to walk you through all the ingredients that we use, the hops, the water profile, the malts, and the yeast. We're also going to walk you through our process, the mashing, mash out, the sparge, the boil, whirlpool, knockout, fermentation. At the very end, we're going to walk you through that taste test. So let's get started. The water profile for our American Amber Ale is 50 parts per million of calcium, 15 parts per million of sodium, 75 parts per million of sulfate, and 65 parts per million of chloride. To do that, I'm adding calcium chloride, gypsum, and Epsom salt to both the mash water and the sparge water. Right now, I have the hot liquor tank heating up and filling up to the right volume and temperature. Once that gets ready, we're going to mash in. But while that's getting prepared, let's go over the malts we're going to be using. The starting gravity for our American Amber Ale is 1052, and to get there, I start with about 75 to 80% of Maris Otter as my base. Anytime I really want that malt depth to come through, Maris Otter will almost always be my base of choice. To help it out, I add around 8% of Munich malt just to bump up that richness a little bit. Now, caramel is an important flavor in this style, so I have two crystal malt additions. I add a light crystal right around 40 Levibond at a rate of about 8%. And then I add a dark crystal around 120 Levibond at a rate of also around 8%. And finally, I top it off with 1% of either a bitterless black malt, such as Black Prince, or a pale chocolate malt. If you go with the black malt, like Black Prince, you'll have a little bit more of a roast flavor. If you go with pale chocolate, you'll have a little bit more of a chocolate flavor. Both will be very subtle, just with the amount being just 1%. But that choice is completely up to you. For this beer, I'm going to be using that Black Prince. The mash water is ready, so let's mash all of that in. We have our normal mashing setup, pulling wort from the bottom of the mash tun, pushing it through our pump through the Herms coil to maintain our temperature, and we recirculate the whole time to set up our grain bed filter. Because we add so many of the crystal malts and we don't want this style to finish too sweet, I mash the American Amber Ale between 150 and 152 degrees Fahrenheit for about 60 minutes to get plenty of fermentable sugars. I don't want to cater more towards the alpha amylase and create more unfermentable sugars, creating an even sweeter beer. So 150 to 152 degrees Fahrenheit single infusion mash will work. Right now I've got about 15 minutes left. Once that timer goes off, I will start to raise that temperature for mash out. Our 60-minute timer is up, so now we are mashing out. With the same setup, we're pulling wort from the bottom of the mash tun, pushing it through our pump through the Herms coil, which is now being heated up by our hot liquor tank, which is getting raised to about 177 degrees, which is raising our mash temperature up to 168 degrees over the course of about 15 minutes. Once we get to 168 degrees, we will begin to sparge. We just got to 168 degrees, so now we are sparging, pulling wort from the bottom of the mash tun, pushing it through our pump, which is now directed towards the boil kettle. At the same time, we are pulling off our sparge water from the hot liquor tank, pushing it through our pump, and rinsing the residual sugars left in the grains. For this American Amber Ale, I add 6 IBUs worth of Citra at the 60-minute mark, 13 IBUs worth of Citra at the 30-minute mark, 8 IBUs worth of Amarillo at the 10-minute mark, and then 5 IBUs worth of Falconer's Flight at the 5-minute mark. Because I want so much hop flavor, but I don't want a crazy amount of bitterness, I really scale back on that bittering addition and focus on those flavoring additions. You can try experimenting with no bitterness addition and just add the 30, 10, and 5-minute hops, and then see how that impacts the flavor. But this hop combination should give you a wonderful citrus flavor that will pair nicely with the malt profile that we developed earlier. We just got to a boil, so we will boil for 90 minutes. I'll add the hops in as needed. At 10 minutes, I will add a yeast nutrient, and then at 5 minutes, I will add Whirlpool tablets as my finding agent. We just finished our boil, so now we are whirlpooling, pulling wort from the bottom of the boil kettle, pushing it through our pump through the tangential input to create a vortex inside the boil kettle to pull all of the hops and proteins to the center so I don't put them in the fermenter during knockout. We just finished our whirlpool, so now we are knocking out, pulling the wort from the bottom of the boil kettle, pushing it through our pump, through the heat exchanger. We have our oxygen being injected down here. The wort going through at about 62 degrees. It is going through this hose, filling up our fermenter and pushing out all the excess air. We ferment the American Amber Ale with the California Ale yeast from White Labs. I'll pitch this at 64 degrees Fahrenheit and let that free rise up to 67 degrees as fermentation starts. I'll hold it here for about a week or until we are 4 specific gravity points away from our terminal gravity, which for this beer is 1016 with a terminal gravity of 1012. Once it reaches this point, I will let it free rise up to 72 degrees for that diacetyl rest, hold it there for 48 hours, and then cold crash it to 33 degrees. I'll hold it at 33 degrees for at least 24 hours, and then I will transfer it to our bright tank, carbonate it to about 2.5, 2.6 volumes of CO2, keg it, and then enjoy. All right, this is what we've got. It is a beautiful amber color. It's crystal clear, has a slightly off-white head. For the smell, I get a lot of the hops in the smell, a lot of that citrus flavor. I don't get much of the malt. The taste, that's where the malt character really comes through. There's a lot of that bready flavors, a little bit of caramel on the back end, maybe a hint of roast. It's got a nice balancing bitterness. We are over the age of 21. We do not condone underage drinking. Please drink responsibly. Cheers. If you would like to see more brewing content like this, make sure you click that subscribe button right below. And let me know what you'd like to see next in the comments. Cheers.